Good morning. I hope you are well, and I'm thankful to be able to share with you again today. And I trust that you had a blessed time celebrating Jesus' resurrection. Today we turn our thoughts back to the book of Philippians. When I was a kid, and I'd watched cartoons on Saturday morning, one of the public service announcements that would run during the commercial breaks said this: "You are what you eat, from your head down to your feet." While this is not directly true, I mean you won't really turn into the food that you eat, we know the principle is true. If you eat healthy, that generally leads to health, and living on unhealthy foods generally leads to health problems. What you eat will affect your health, for the good or for the bad. And while the passage we will examine today is not specifically about food, it is about what we feed our mind. And the spiritual principle contained here follows the same logic as what you eat. What you put into your mind and surround yourselves with will affect your thinking and therefore your actions. And that brings us to our passage from Philippians chapter 4, verse 8. Paul writes this: "Finally, brethren, whatever things are true, whatever things are noble, whatever things are just, whatever things are pure, whatever things are lovely, whatever things are of good report, if there is any virtue, and if there is anything praiseworthy, meditate on these things." Now consider what we've been examining in Philippians over the previous weeks. We've talked about the instructions to be of one mind rather than be divided as believers, to rejoice in all things, to be of a gentle spirit in all circumstances, and to avoid anxiety and instead rest in the peace of God. Well, might today's passage be connected to all those things? Well, absolutely yes. What you fill your mind with will directly impact your thinking, for the good or for the bad. In fact, isn't that the whole point of advertising? To get a product before an audience and do it enough that it sticks? Well, friends, whatever you put in your mind is what will occupy your thoughts. When I was 10, I bought my first record, an actual record. And in doing so, I discovered my favorite band of all time. Their name is Petra. I had their albums and their cassettes, and I listened to them over and over, and I, in fact, still do on my computer. And one of the things I didn't realize at the time, but now I have, is the amount of excellent theology that was being drilled into my head through their lyrics. Even though I wasn't contemplating the lyrics at the time, they were taking up residence in my mind, and that was a good thing. Well, friends, this is what happens with whatever you fill your mind with. It takes up residence in your mind and influences your outlook, your thinking, and your decision-making. In today's world, it's not difficult to find a source that will tell you what you want to hear. In just a moment on the internet, you can find a source to validate your opinion, even if it's not rooted in any truth. And if you're looking for a teacher to validate sin, whatever that sin might be, you can find one. And they'll explain away the instructions of Scripture, replacing the Scripture with a theology that makes things relative and exempts you from obedience or imposes upon you a set of requirements the Scripture doesn't. And that's why John said in 1 John 4:1, "Dear friends, do not believe everyone who claims to speak by the Spirit. You must test them to see if the Spirit they have comes from God, for there are many false prophets in the world." Therefore, as followers of Jesus, we must use discernment with what fills our mind. And consider the test that Paul sets up in Philippians 4:8. Let me read that again. "Finally, brethren, whatever things are true," they need to be true. "Whatever things are noble." Being noble means it's worthy of respect, that it's honorable. "Whatever things are just," meaning that which is right, that which conforms to God's standards. "Whatever things are pure," that means to be free from defilement or impurity. "Whatever things are lovely, and whatever things are of good report," those things that are well spoken of. And let's think about that word lovely for a moment. That means acceptable or pleasing. And that leads us to a good question. Are our thoughts lovely? There's so much hatred in our world today. In large part, it's fueled by the internet and the anonymity that it provides. People can say all kinds of things with no consequence, things they wouldn't ever say to someone if they were face to face. But are our thoughts lovely? If we fill our mind with things that encourage us towards hatred and anger, well then, friends, we need to find new friends. Because that's what the computer, that's what the phone, that's what those internet sources have become. They've replaced friendships. We might not think of them in that way, but a friend is someone who influences your thinking, and unfortunately for a lot of people, their friends have become devices. And those devices aren't always encouraging them towards the things of the Lord, to have thoughts that are lovely, that are acceptable and pleasing. And therefore, we're told to use discernment, because ultimately, we are the ones who decide what is granted access into the mind. So Paul tells us to use discernment and to look for good and godly things to occupy our thoughts, because he goes on and says this: if there is any virtue and if there is anything praiseworthy, meditate on these things. Do you want to think differently? Do you want to act differently? Look at what you're filling your mind with. And ask yourself, do these things help conform you to the image of Christ, or do they encourage you in the ways of this world? Romans 12:2 put it this way: do not conform any longer to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Well, friends, our minds are easily deceived, and we must renew them constantly so that we will not live as the world lives, but live as Christ lived. So let's examine the things that occupy our thoughts, and let's ask ourselves if they have virtue and if they are praiseworthy, and let's meditate on those things. It might be good to take Philippians 4:8, to write it out and stick it above your computer screen or your television or next to your phone or next to the books that you read, whatever it might be, and ask yourself, is what I'm filling my mind with going to encourage me in living for Christ? Let's ask ourselves that question, and let's use discernment and meditate on the things that are honorable unto God. I look forward to sharing with you next week. May you have a blessed week.